I think it's appropriate now that we're enjoying this wonderful lunch that our next speaker is going to address the issue as to how the California agricultural industry is responding to some of the climate change issues. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. John Hewitt. John is General Counsel and Senior Advisor to the Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture. John's worked in other agricultural areas before with the California Farm Bureau, and he's also an expert on water. He's worked at the California Regional Water Quality Control Board. John studied at the McGeorge School of Law and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. John's going to take about 15 minutes and talk to us about the agricultural sector and the intersection with global climate change. John, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. One common theme you repeatedly hear about is that there are conflicting claims about economic impacts of AB 32, the practicality of implementing climate change policy, laws, and regulations, and the impacts on specific sectors of the California economy. Matter of fact, there isn't much regarding climate change or AB 32 that isn't immersed in conflict. You hear it all from both sides. It's too expensive. We can't afford it. We can't afford not to do it. Technology doesn't exist. If you mandate the technology, they'll create it. We're in a warming trend. We're in a cooling trend. We're in a warming trend and cooling trend. We're in a cooling trend and a warming trend inside of a cooling trend. I think we've all heard it all from plenty of very esteemed and not so esteemed scientists, politicians, and lawyers for that matter. If that isn't hard enough to keep track of, the issues surrounding food are even more complex. You have conventional versus organic. There's transitional organic or sustainable, heirloom versus biotech, vine ripe versus store ripe, locally grown locally, free trade agreements, CSAs, and the list goes on and on and on. Every day we're confronted with these choices, but the good news is that we do have choices. We had a wonderful set of choices here at lunch through the buffet line. And with respects to choices, it's important to keep that in mind, whether we're talking about organic versus sustainable and whatnot. The choices that we have are not available to more than 1 billion people currently worldwide. According to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, those 1 billion people worldwide are undernourished. As the human population expands and standards of living increase, the world agricultural production will need to double over the next 50 years to keep up with projected demand. But food production is already facing significant ecological constraints, including invasive species, limits to the arable land that we do have, water scarcity, soil nutrient depletion, and biological limits to increasing crop yields. Climate change is expected to reduce yields significantly, particularly where food scarcity is already endemic. So what does climate change have to do with agriculture? Well, everything and nothing all at the same time. And it's important, but most importantly, its importance cannot be overstated, because the bottom line is, for all the uncertainty that we do know and that I've already discussed, the one thing we do have a pretty good grasp on is that unpredictable weather causes unpredictable harvests, which results in an unpredictable food supply. It's been the goal of Secretary Kawamura to have California agriculture continue its focus on addressing and preparing for unpredictable climate by pursuing strategies that lead to the preservation and advancement of our endangered agriculture and forestry land resource base. To that end, the Secretary has created a coalition of national leaders under the leadership of the United Nations Foundation to develop a work plan for focusing on solutions from the land. Collectively, these groups, together with distinguished leaders from around the country, are exploring opportunities to develop a shared vision for the way farms and ranches and forests can deliver climate change, conservation, and ecosystem services, while at the same time meeting our growing global food, fiber, and our fuel consumption. Complementary to this project into this process, the Department of Food and Agriculture, with several other partners, has developed the Ag Vision. In the Ag Vision process, it is a strategy for synergy formed by linking together food, water, and energy sheds to form a stronger pillar of agricultural viability and survivability across the varied geographic and demographic regions of this state. California agriculture, either being pushed or drug along, has for a long time been a world leader in many areas. With more than half of the nation's fruits and vegetables and $13 billion in international trade, California has balanced its successes to meet the growing nutritional needs with its obligations of environmental stewardship. However, we're reaching our limit. The impacts of climate change and competing demand for natural resources illustrate the need for consistent investments in agriculture, because these investments serve as the backbone to combat poverty, hunger, climate change, and also serve as a prerequisite for economic growth. There is no silver bullet and no optimal decision strategy that will deliver the perfect regulatory package or endless amounts of economic stimulus. Practical, accessible solutions for agriculture need to be implemented to choose a path of living over that of mere survival. So amidst the conflicting views and uncertainty, Secretary Kawamura has focused on a couple of key areas over the last several years. One of those is research, the other is rural investments. With respects to research, as I had mentioned previously, the global population is expected to nearly double to 9 billion people by the year 2050, which in turn requires a doubling of the current food supply just to have status quo. Therefore, research needs to balance yield maximization and input maximization, and I guess we should all collectively ask our questions: how can we do more with more, or what can we achieve by doing more with more? With respect to rural investments, the importance of it, I guess, can be illustrated, for example, with respects to both Africa and Asia's rural areas. As I mentioned previously, the 1 billion people that are currently undernourished in the world right now, a supermajority of them live in those two geographic areas. Those governments are faced with a very difficult task on a daily basis of balancing not only greenhouse gas reductions or greenhouse gas emissions, but also providing basic nutritional needs for their populations. An investment in agriculture can improve the environment, create food security, have a positive effect on climate change, and thereby avoid the spread of low-intensity farming into these fragile and ecologically sensitive lands in these locations. So while we enjoy the opportunity for choices and a chance to debate the impacts of preferred strategies, agriculture will continue to feed the world and try to adapt to a plan for the uncertain future. Thank you.
Dan is a columnist with the Sacramento Bee, and he is clearly an expert on California politics. Many of us read his column every day. He has been a journalist for around 50 years, plus or minus, working exclusively with California newspapers. A few years ago, at the age of 22, Dan was the nation's youngest daily newspaper editor, which is pretty cool. He has written more than 6,000 articles about California and its politics, and his column now appears in more than 50 California newspapers. He is also founding editor of the California Political Almanac and co-author of The Third House, Lobbyist Money and Power in Sacramento, which is a book on lobbying, which we've been talking about. Dan Walters is a frequent guest on national television news shows commenting on California politics. We're very privileged to have Dan here today to give us some final comments. Dan?
Thank you very much. The last time I was at this podium, I think it was this podium, at least it was right here in this spot, it was about, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago. I'd written a column about, a kind of a whimsical column about murder mysteries set in California and how they explored various periods of California's history, if you read Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler and so on and so forth. And so they called a conference in this building. Unfortunately, I was sicker than a dog that day. I showed up just long enough, I gasped my way through a little introduction speech and had to flee. So I get a little longer time here this time. But more importantly, this is the auditorium where every year Arnold Schwarzenegger gets up on this stage and introduces his state budget. And you know how that's worked out. So I'm not sure this is the luckiest venue in the world for your conference. but what I want to talk about today is putting this AB 32, and I guess Proposition 23 for that matter, in kind of a little broader context of California. There's not many ways you could look at those two measures, particularly AB 32. But I think there's a couple of things that have to be kept in mind about its passage and its implementation. One is, a very important one, is that it was passed in an election year in which Arnold Schwarzenegger was seeking re-election, coming off a disastrous ballot measure scenario in 2005. His popularity was very low, and he was seeking re-election, and he was looking for ways to boost his popularity. And so he wanted to set have a legislative record in that year, and so he kind of, after confronting the legislature with his ballot measures in 2005, he basically said, I surrender, and please give me a legislative record. And so he opened the door to that, and AB 32 was one of the results. I think that's one way to look at it. It was done at a particular moment in time in political circumstances and also in economic circumstances. The state was rolling in money at those times. The economy was booming. Now we know falsely with a bunch of an unsustainable housing bubble. But at that moment in time, we were at the peak of that bubble, that boom that occurred in the last decade. The state was flush with money. Things were going great, and this is the sort of thing that in that kind of optimistic, upbeat mood might take place. That's another way to look at AB 32, that it was a moment in time, both politically and economically. But I think the most important context of AB 32 is that it is, in a sense, part of a larger context of political and societal change in California. It's one of, I was trying to count them up walking over here, I think it's fair to say it's one of four big high concept, what they call in Hollywood, high concept things. Things that aren't just mundane, but are high concept, have kind of sex appeal or sort of a larger context of appearance. And all of these were started in Arnold Schwarzenegger's governorship, and he hopes to leave them as a legacy. And taken together, all four of these things have the potential, according to who you believe, to remake California's economy and therefore its society in very beneficial ways, kind of putting California back on the map as the leader of technology and innovation, or conversely, again, depending on who you believe, they have the capacity to ruin us, to make us totally uncompetitive in a global economy and sacrifice this state to the whims of ideological certainty or ideological, what's the word I want to do? Religion, let's call it, dogma. So that's the context. We don't know, and truly we don't know what will happen as these four things. Now, what are these four things? Well, AB 32 is obviously one of them. You have to put in that same context SB 375, the companion measure that seeks to align land use in California to the emission or carbon reducing goals of AB 32. And in doing so, completely rewrites land use policy in the state and basically interjects the state as a land use arbiter into a field that had hitherto been the province of local government. So that's one. AB 32 and 375 are companions. That's one of the big four. One of the other big ones is the bullet train, so-called, that its advocates say, if built, will remake the transportation system of California in an environmentally friendly way, and, they say, generate a whole slew of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs, both directly in terms of the construction of the bullet train system, and indirectly in terms of subsidiary benefits from that. And of course, that then tied into SB 375, which is aimed at changing land use to make it more transit friendly and less dependent upon the automobile. So the second big thing is the bullet train. Now, what's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen. The state has passed a bond issue for this bullet train that would link Northern California and Southern California of $9.95 billion, which $9 billion would be actually spent on the bullet train project, the other stuff for other things. But the project is estimated to cost at least $40 billion now, and nobody believes that's the upper limit of it. And no one knows where the rest of the money is going to come from. Is it going to come from the federal government? Is it going to come from private investors? Or will it come at all? Or is this just simply a big pie in the sky? The project has many critics, including myself. The business plan appears to be a little squirrely, more than a little squirrely, as a matter of fact. The ridership numbers have been denounced by the University of California's Transportation Studies Institute. So we don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but it'll be there after Arnold Schwarzenegger leaves the governorship as one of his legacies. The third big thing is this new water program that promises or pledges that it is going to both improve the environmental quality of the Delta, an area that I have a great interest in because I'm a boater, just like Jonathan Barker, who's running around here with the microphone. We are both boaters, both members of the Sacramento Yacht Club. Both improve the quality of the Delta water and the wildlife habitat, and simultaneously improve deliveries of that water to Southern California. It has the potential to end decades of water wars and perhaps serve both of those goals that a lot of people consider to be kind of self-contradictory, or not, in which case those water wars would continue to besiege the state for more decades to come. The fourth big thing just happened just a few days ago when the governor signed a couple of pieces of legislation to create a thing called the California Health Exchange that will implement the new federal health care program, but goes well beyond that, as a matter of fact, and basically accomplishes, or could accomplish, what the governor tried to do a few years ago, is to produce a state-only health care system to create universal or near-universal health care thing. All of these measures, individually and collectively, have a potentially huge impact on the California economy, either positively or negatively, depending on which analysis. And frankly, the voters will be voting on Proposition 23 in ignorance. They don't know. I just got another study. I mean, you'll use with these studies. One says it's a great thing that AB 32 is a wonderful thing. It's going to create jillions of new jobs. The next one comes along and says AB 32 is going to destroy the economy. Another one comes along and says it's going to be a wonderful thing. Another one comes along and says it's going to be a terrible thing. Academics are getting paid a lot of money to generate these kind of studies these days. It's a kind of a cottage industry that's going on. But who are you to believe? Who truly are you to believe? The voters will make a decision on 23. It'll probably be defeated. But they will make a decision basically without really knowing, any more than any of us in this room know, truly how that measure will play itself out. Will we be, in fact, creating a new cutting-edge technology that will accrue to the economic benefit of this state as well as the social, cultural, and environmental benefit of this state in the years and decades ahead by putting us out front of the move to curb greenhouse gases? Or will we be burdening ourselves needlessly with many billions of dollars of additional costs that will be borne by utility customers and business, and it will depress us further? We know that the economy is not what it was in 2006. In 2006, we were in a boom. Today, we're in the worst of all busts, at least the worst since the Great Depression, with 12.5% unemployment, with economists saying we are looking at double-digit employment for years to come, with the state budget running multi-billion-dollar deficits year after year after year after year, with services being slashed, and with nothing truly evident on the horizon that's going to pull California out of these doldrums. If, in fact, the rest of the country comes out of recession, which it appears to be doing slowly, and California is left behind along with a few other states like Michigan, then we'll know there's something fundamentally awry, that somehow we have missed the boat. And the question then is, will the boat be all of these things, healthcare, global warming, bullet trains, water, infrastructure, will that be enough to lift this economy out of its misery, or will it in fact contribute to that misery? It's a gamble. It's huge. All these four things are huge gambles whose payoff or lack thereof will become evident years, maybe even decades ahead, long after the politicians who implemented these things, particularly the governor, are long gone from the scene. But it is collectively a monumental change, potential change in the nature of the California economy, which has gone from from a pre-industrial economy, from a resource economy, to an industrial economy during World War II and after World War II, to a post-industrial technology communications economy in the last couple of decades, and now to what? We don't know. Certainly the more current models are not working anymore. Will this be the new wave of clean energy, green jobs, and so forth? Or will we simply make ourselves look foolish by going out on a limb and having the rest of the world saw it off behind us? We don't know. No one knows. No one truly knows the answers to those questions, and yet we are wagering, essentially, our future on these monumental steps paying off or not. We don't know. We don't know. And that's really, I think, the most interesting thing about this whole, we can discuss global warming and all the potential, all the technicalities and the science and everything like that. But in terms of California, we know, as someone just said a few minutes ago, what we do will have little effect, direct effect on that. We're trying to get out in front in hopes both, I guess, of being a moral leader and to reap the economic benefits of it, if in fact there are economic benefits. But it is a gamble. It's a huge gamble. I don't know, and I don't think anyone in this room knows. I don't think anybody at the ARB knows. I don't think anybody in the governor's office knows whether any of these things will pay off or be huge mistakes, monumental mistakes. The only good thing about it, I guess, is that I'll have a lot to write about. No matter how it turns out. You know, the people in my business, what is a journalist, particularly a political journalist? We're the ones who show up after the battle and shoot the wounded. And no matter how it turns out, there'll be a lot of wounded to shoot. It's an interesting it's an interesting scenario. I mean, we're basically gambling the future of the state. Now, will it even come to pass? Well, that will depend in large measure on who's elected the next governor. Jerry Brown's elected governor. He's an ardent advocate of AB 32, SB 375, the bullet train, and so on and so forth. If Meg Whitman's elected governor, she's not, and will probably delay things regardless of what happens on Proposition 23. So to a certain extent, this is a gamble. Not only it's a gamble that's been put in motion on all of these fronts, all these four big high concept issues, but it's also something that the next governor could slow if she is elected as next governor. So then that is a little bit uncertain. That's another gamble, I suppose. What if she stops all this stuff and it turns out it was the right thing to do? Then she's going to have egg all over her face, isn't she? So the politicians are gambling. Californians are gambling. We're all gambling. And it's a huge wager, a huge segment of the California economy is either on the verge of prosperity or at risk of going down based on what happens on these four fronts over the next 8, 10, 12 years, say by 2020. This should be an interesting decade, if nothing else. I'm going to stop right there, and maybe I can answer some questions or try to respond to them. Yes?
Dan Sperling, UC Davis, and CARB.
And CARB.
And CARB.
Does everybody work for CARB at UC? I sometimes think so.
Only the good people.
Oh, not that fellow down at UCLA, though, right?
Not yet. You know, I get the sense, it seems to me that you're overstating this huge gamble. And if you just look at AB 32 and 375, and maybe, you know, you've been around a while, compare it to some of the things California's done in the past, you know, creating the UC system, the educational system, you know, the higher education system, the freeway system, the water system. It seems to me that those represented much larger investments, much larger gambles, in using your words, than with AB 32. I mean, AB 32 is, there's so many little moving pieces to it that can be slowed down, that don't represent big investments. So, just wondering your reaction.
Well, I think that, again, you put all four of those things in context. They do represent a huge gamble in financial terms, and also a huge gamble in, I guess, philosophical terms about what kind of a state is this going to be. Is it going to be one kind of a state or another kind of a state? So I don't think it's overstating the case. Yes, those other things were huge, and we haven't done big stuff in California for many years, as you know. And I don't know, and so, you know, you can gauge it any way you want to, but I think together, all four of these things, when you take, for example, this health exchange, will basically assume control of the largest single segment of the California economy, which is the healthcare industry, almost $200 billion a year industry. 375 in terms of land use. The land use is a huge economic factor in California. Whether land is developed one way or developed another way is a huge factor. And AB 32, the cost that could impose on utilities, for example, and perhaps with rippling effects by raising utility rates and making ourselves less competitive in the global economy, there is a huge gamble attached to that. So I don't think we overstate the thing to say that collectively, these four things represent a huge wager on California's future. Whether that wager pays off positively or turns out to be a bust, we simply don't know. And we won't know for some years to come. But don't assume that just because it's being done, it's going to all turn out well. There are negative impacts or potential negative impacts of all these things. And it is a question. It's an unquestioned. It's an uncertainty. Anyone else? I guess I've stultified you all. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. And we're right on time. And I will call the conference closed. And thank you for coming.